Yes, so highly recommended by all of us. Would we say the same about Equilibrium, which the next film we go on to?
Oh, yeah. So before I start talking about Equilibrium, just a short note. Drew and I have not compared notes beforehand, but I feel like at least the first part of this might go over some common ground. I have made a mistake. When I reviewed Equilibrium for our old website back in 2003, I cited one of its weaknesses as, quote, overuse of blatant fascist and religious symbolism, unquote, going on to assert, quote, I'm intelligent enough to know what kind of regime we're dealing with without having 80-foot-high, thinly veiled swastikas flapping in my face, and I dare say most viewers will feel the same, unquote. Had I known then what I know now, I might not have been so disparaging of Equilibrium's relative lack of iconographic sophistication, given that I was quite clearly placing way too much faith in most viewers, and I would argue perhaps we haven't been blatant enough in our symbolism this past decade and a half. Such is life. Christian Bale plays Preston, a cleric of the Tetragrammaton, whose job it is to police a doped future society for the threat of human emotion, which everybody agrees is the reason why there was a Third World War. Now, you can't really argue with that assertion, but of course, there is at least a small debate to be had around our existence as humans bereft of emotion, pleasure, feeling, and an underground resistance movement exists to disrupt the supply of the universal mood-suppressant prosium, which the populace imbibe daily to keep them from larking about. Our new monolithic police state society, Libria, is lorded over by Sean Pertwee's father. Sorry, Sean Pertwee being in something just cracks me up. His rambling monologues on the dangers posed by emotional response broadcast to massive communal screens, blimps, etc., day and night. Father's mouthpiece at the head of government is Angus McFadyen. Well, not actually Angus McFadyen, but I do often have to be reminded that Angus McFadyen is supposed to be an actor. His character, DuPont, is basically a remorseless son of a bitch who looks and sounds like nothing so much as Angus McFadyen, and is hell-bent on using the Tetragrammaton to smash the resistance at any cost, though he has his suspicions about the dedication of Bale's Preston following sense offences on the part of both his wife and his colleague. His colleague, Sean Bean. Well, not actually Sean Bean, but I do often have to be reminded that Sean Bean is supposed to be an actor. So far, so blah 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 Nazi analogue. Equilibrium does, however, attempt to set itself apart via some spry hybrid kung fu gunplay, which at the turn of the century seemed fairly fresh and interesting. Keeping in mind that the movie initially came about at a time where a new cinematic wave of Asian martial arts and shooty bang bangs were in full swing, it's maybe surprising that this is the only film I can think of where an attempt was made to meld the two in such an overt fashion, at least at this kind of budget level, and I actually feel it still works quite well, if perhaps more recently overshadowed by the highly choreographed antics of John Wick and the likes. Writer-director Kurt Wimmer. Wimmer? Is there a consensus on that?
Is he German?
I don't know.
I think he's American.
He is actually German. It's Wimmer.
Yeah, I know it's Wimmer if he's German, but I don't think he's German.
I expect to still pronounce it Wimmer, but who cares?
Yeah, let's call it Wimmer. Anyway, he doesn't do much with any degree of subtlety, though here he is certainly more focused than we witnessed with Ultraviolet a couple of years later.
Yeah.
Following that movie's poor critical and box office performance, Wimmer has yet to helm another project, instead focusing on writing and developing story and screenplays, though there's enough craft on display in Equilibrium to suggest that, given the opportunity and time, he may have had some more decent directorial work in him. I was perhaps surprised to find I still quite liked Equilibrium, and I still disagree with the total critical drubbing it took. Oddly enough, one of the few people to credit the movie was Roger Ebert, who said something along the lines of, "It would be mindless action except that it has a mind."
The same Roger Ebert that didn't get Starship Troopers.
Yes. But I broadly agree with Roger on this one. If I may be so egotistical as to quote my 23-year-old self, Wimmer has taken a bold, modern approach and introduced much that is new to what would otherwise have been a dull and largely unnecessary political statement. And remember how we agreed earlier on the whole unnecessary political statement bit? Equilibrium is not the most sophisticated, best choreographed, or greatest, well, anything really, but it is the only work of art to incorporate Christian Bale, Emily Mortimer, Taye Diggs, Angus McFadyen, and Brian Connolly. My pitch for Marvel Phase 4 starts here.
Yes, Brian Connolly. I had entirely forgotten that he was in this, and Brian Connolly possibly. But that's Brian Conley.
I had completely forgotten he was in this, and I had exactly the same thought this time as I did when I first saw this in the cinema, which is like, I can't believe he's not called Christian Bale. Fascist puppets! Yeah, it's taken us back.
Unfortunately.
Yes. Equilibrium has obviously aged quite poorly on a number of levels, but I still quite enjoyed it. And I'm not sure how much of that's nostalgia, because I did enjoy it quite a lot back in the day. It being one of the few Matrix knockoffs, at least in terms of how it presents its action, it was actually pretty good, as opposed to a lot of them which were just awful. And I think the action scenes still hold up quite well for all of this.
They're all right, yeah.
And it's certainly elevated by having the likes of Christian Bale knocking around in it, because, yeah, the baseline story is bare bones at best. And I think if it did not have some pretty good performances, even from the likes of Sean Bean, particularly Bale. I really love the scene where it's one of the first times he goes into one of these treasure troves of confiscated stuff. I think it's Sean Bean's old pad, where he's like, Beethoven, he's an emotional reaction to that, but he also has the same highly emotional reaction to some chintzy little snow globe. But that's kind of believable. If you hadn't seen any art at all, maybe that's kind of thing that sells it quite well. But yeah, if it had any less talent behind the camera in terms of the action choreography and how that's captured, and doing your old acting in front of it, yes, this would probably be quite bad. As it is, it's just somewhat dated, and I still quite enjoyed it. Yes, certainly not subtle in anything that's trying to do, but I think it still has a measure of success. It definitely doesn't deserve to be ignored.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't deserve to be pilloried. And while it looks low budget, I mean, it was only $20 million, so it was low budget, so it still looks passable enough. Although, curiously, in my head, it felt more of akin to something like the very kind of polished world of Aeon Flux. Yeah. Rather than its sort of kind of brutalist architecture with a wee bit of Judge Dredd's Badlands. It's just weird how that kind of transmogrified in my memory. It's passably entertaining still. It's just that I kind of think it fails a wee bit in the world building, because they talk about a resistance, and like, but what resistance? You haven't mentioned this for the entire rest of the film. Where did they come from? There's one very fleeting reference early on to terrorist activities, but beyond that, nothing. And you suddenly drop in this resistance at the end. There wasn't a resistance. There was just a suggestion that people had these banned items, and there's this sudden plot convenient escalation that comes out of nowhere, that suddenly they're just going to summarily execute people. They didn't even know who these people were to begin with. Why is this suddenly a thorn in your side when there was no mention of them before?
Yeah. And there are clearly only 30 of them.
Yeah.
Which I suspect was a budgetary constraint more than anything. But
particularly when the whole last act of it is about like them taking over the entire city, and they've previously placed bombs and all that. It's like, what, all 5 of you have? When did you have time to execute this master plan?
Also, given apparently skipping even one dose of Prosium is enough to let you start feeling again, but they need to wait for some action before they bomb. Well, if you bombed the dispensaries, would it not just... You'd be fine, it would work.
Yes.
Yeah. But this is a film that is not asking to be thought that hard about.
Or at all.
Yes. But it's also, do you know what, watching this, do you know what my takeaway from it this time was? It's really interesting to see where people draw the line. Because, I mean, this got absolutely hammered at the time, and I don't think it deserves it. And do you know what another movie is that is really crap and unsophisticated and is entirely saved by a single central performance? Joker. And we're throwing awards at that, apparently. Yes. So
it's kind of more intense an action film. It kind of fails as anything else, I feel. I don't know, it feels like it almost has something to say, but it doesn't quite, and then it kind of cops out in some other ways as well. Like, it's got the idea of, as much as it explores it at all, that Angus McFadden is a hypocrite, which is hardly novel ground for this sort of the film. But so he's got like the room full of paintings and stuff, and also presumably apparently anger isn't an emotion.
Yes, I know that's because a number of times people just display outright anger and they're not pulled up for it.
Yeah, so these sorts of things are very often inconsistently written, but I kind of feel they've missed something here, because fanaticism is actually more interesting than hypocrisy. Every sci-fi dystopian thing like has some hypocrisy at the end of it, but actually, see if he was just an outright fanatic and really wanted nobody to have any emotion or anything, that would be far more interesting. And I feel it's a bit of a cop-out. as a result, I don't think it's got an awful lot to say. It's a very unsubtle fascist world and the totalitarianism stuff, but I don't think it says an awful lot about it. Which is a pity, because I feel you could, in that world, that idea, do something a bit better. And if you take Christian Bale away from it, it's just there's nothing in this film at all.
Yeah, I think it's a platform for something a lot better. I don't think it would have necessarily taken a lot more work to make significantly more out of it, but I still actually enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to watching it this time.
I didn't not enjoy it, and I found it entertaining enough for the time I was watching it. Just I don't think there's anything particularly special in there, and I doubt I'll watch it again. I don't mind having watched this time, but
it's one of those victims of its time where I think it's just kind of been surpassed in pretty much every respect by any other films at this point, from the sort of gunplay aspects to the visuals to
I think it does,
thematically it's just
it does itself no favours too of clearly owns so much to the Matrix, to the point where there are huge bits of the music that are just basically lifted straight from the Matrixy soundtrack, and it's just. It sort of suffers from that is point as well. It's like it's been surpassed in other ways, but it still really obviously shows its influences there.
I'm always sceptical of crying things out for being derivative of The Matrix, given that The Matrix was absolutely the most derivative sci-fi film ever, pretty much, in terms of where it gets its ideas from. But yeah, I think The Matrix was the first thing in that vein in a long time to have any sort of significant cultural impact, I think. So I think even probably drew as well in terms of some of the costume and the dress, you can draw a direct comparison to The Matrix and some of the outfits, especially the stuff worn by the Tetragrammaton. If you look at, it's basically a white version of what Morpheus is wearing, at certain points in the film. In fact, at one point towards the end, Christian Bale basically, that's literally just a white version of Morpheus's outfit. But interesting kind of to go back to. I don't know that I'm going to be going back to any time soon again, but still enjoyable at some level.
Yeah, I still think Taye Diggs got a bit hard done by. I would like to see Taye Diggs in more stuff after this. He kind of quite quickly fell off the radar.
So this in Chicago, and I don't think I've seen him much beyond this too. I
was wondering about this because I've seen 2 or 3 films with Taye Diggs in, and he's never been objectionable. And actually, it's funny you mention that, because again, after watching this, I sat and thought, I wonder what actually has become of Taye Diggs. But I didn't really care enough to pop his name into IMDb. But I really enjoyed his performance in Go. Which came out probably 4 or 5 years before this, if I remember. That was like 96, 97.
Yeah.
I think was that
was 99.
Was it 99? Was it Doug Liman?
That sounds right. I do remember, Katie Holmes' film, yeah.
Yeah. It's a film I keep meaning to go back to, actually. Right. Yeah. Keep meaning to go back to that film.
Yeah, he's not done much. He was in Basic, which is that one of many terrible John Travolta films.
Yes.
He was in Chicago, but he's a pretty minor role in that. And after that, I don't really see him in much.
I think he went back to stage work.
Did he?
I think I read that a while back.
Makes me wonder if he did something behind the scenes to fall out of favour, or if there's some sort of story about that. Or it could just be.
In 2017, he was in the My Little Pony movie.
Yes.
Nice.
Cinematic masterwork.
Could just be it never took off for him, but. I would have liked to have seen him in more stuff.
If nothing else, I will also appreciate him for that scene towards the end where he's kind of built up as the boss battle and is immediately dispatched offhand. That's the one thing of this film that I remembered incredibly clearly all this time afterwards.
I remember being incredibly satisfied by that at the time.
The bit of the film that I remember pretty clearly was the extra clip stuck on the floor with the kind of Weebles.
Oh, weighted. The weighted base.
And I watched this and it's like, well, that was underwhelming.
I remember that. I think I remembered that battle as being a lot longer and a lot more sustained than it actually was in the end. But cool. But there you go. We've probably said enough about that.